subscribe.
The curtains were kept drawn now in the Finchley flat. The electric light stayed on throughout the day. Mitchell had disappeared, but Ronnie remained a prisoner, locking himself away from the police. Like Mitchell, he was armed and going mad from solitude. Unlike him, he had a powerful gang and a twin brother ready for any sacrifice to keep him happy. For Ronnie, the war against the Richardsons continued, for he was certain there were men at large seeking revenge for George Cornell. He had to kill them first. They were all on his list, and through his spies he still received regular reports upon their whereabouts. As he lay locked in his bedroom, he planned exactly how to kill each one of them. This was exciting, his favorite activity, and it would keep him occupied for hours until his thoughts turned from other people's deaths to his own. Then the depression would begin, and he would suddenly be terrified, powerless and trapped and horribly alone. Life was a waking nightmare for him then. His violent life had turned against him. He was his own corpse. The bullet he had seen enter into Cornell's head was entering his own. He dreamed that he was being disemboweled, slowly castrated, drowned in his own blood. Once he woke and slashed his wrists, but someone in the next room heard his groans and saved his life. During these attacks, he generally lay drugged or drunk for days, with Reggie or his favorite boy watching until the terror left him. Members of the firm calling at the flat would often hear him shrieking in his sleep. Once he woke in the early morning and was found by Reggie's bed with a gun, saying that he would have to shoot him. Soon after this, Reggie arranged for him to see his regular psychiatrist. So as to avoid involving the psychiatrist with the police, Reggie arranged to meet him in Trafalgar Square. When he showed up, a big car was already waiting by the curb. The psychiatrist was hustled in. Ronnie was in the back with his collar up and wearing dark glasses. For the next hour, as the car cruised through Hyde Park, Ronnie described his symptoms and had fresh drugs prescribed. They helped, and at the start of February 1967, Ronnie changed hiding places. Reggie had found him a room above an antique shop off the King's Road. There was a new boy too, a Scandinavian with fair hair. Life became easier. Throughout this crisis, Reggie remained calm. Those who knew him found his self-control almost unnatural. Helped by his brother Charlie, he seemed able to keep the routine business of the firm ticking over, nothing adventurous, but the protection money was still regularly collected from the West End. Various frauds continued. Clubs still made money. Somehow the prestige of the Kray name was preserved. He had grown thinner, and the drink made his eyes bloodshot, his face blotchy in the mornings. These were the only signs of strain. Like Ronnie, he possessed great stamina, and he knew that everything depended on him. It was his love of Ronnie that kept him going, or if not love, it was the necessity to protect him, an instinct that went back to childhood and that proved stronger now than anything. Even when Frances made a fresh attempt to kill herself towards the end of February, he managed to keep calm. Ronnie needed him most. Because he knew this and could understand Ronnie's sickness, he could usually endure his drunken taunts, his sneers, the raucous boasts that he was the only man in the family. He made no reply, just as he made no reply to those who whispered that he was responsible for Frances, that he had got her onto drugs, and that she had tried to kill herself from fear of the twins. It was at night, before the drink began to work, that he would sometimes wonder how much longer he could go on. So many people knew too much. Some would keep quiet from loyalty, others from fear. Others would always hate the twins. Sooner or later somebody would talk and everything would be over. When spring came, life seemed easier. Ronnie appeared to have survived his months in hiding. Nobody talked, nobody had been killed. The case against the police inspector was nearing its time limit. Once it was over, Ronnie would be free. He was already talking about his holiday and his new plans for the firm. The police seemed to have forgotten the Cornell case. Inquiries about Frank Mitchell had still to reach Lenny Dunn's flat in Barking or the girl in Winston's club. The twins had luck if nothing else. There even seemed a chance of a fresh start for Reggie with his wife now she was out of hospital. She was no longer with her parents but with her brother and his wife in a big block of flats called Wimborne Court. Frances was listless, thinner than she used to be. The pert Cockney bride had become a waif of nearly 23, too tired to bother with her friends. The annulment proceedings had been held up during her time in hospital, so she was still officially Mrs. Kray. When Reggie suggested a day out together, she accepted. She found him changed, more like the man he had been when he first knew her. He said he realized his mistakes, still loved her, wanted her back. They could have a new flat right away from Ronnie, a new life quite apart from the firm. As a start, they could have a holiday abroad, even a second honeymoon, Ibiza, at the end of June. Frances agreed. On the 6th of June, 1967, they went to book their tickets. Reggie believed in premonitions. That night he woke knowing that something was wrong with Frances. He couldn't sleep again and just before 6 a.m. drove round to Wimborne Court to see her. He would have rung the bell but realized that everyone would still be sleeping, so went away. An hour later, Frankie Shay got up and went to his sister's room with a cup of tea. She seemed to be still asleep, so he left the tea by her bed and went off to work. Around lunchtime, her father had just returned to Ormsby Street when his son came rushing in, shouting that Frances was dead. He had his Mini parked outside and they drove to the flat. Frank Shay did not believe she was really dead. Twice he had saved her from attempted suicide, somehow it must be possible again, and when he saw her on her bed she seemed peaceful, as if she were just sleeping. He took her hands to wake her, but I could feel her arms already stiffening. It was her third go. This time there was nothing we could do. She had been dead some hours. It was a terrible thing, but all that I could think was how those bastards had destroyed my daughter. Reggie arrived later. When Frank Shay had gone, his son sent a messenger to Valence Road asking for him. He came, knowing that something had happened to Frances, but like Frank Shay, it was not until he took her hands that he knew she was dead. And like him, he felt enormous hatred at her death. I blame her parents. They didn't want her to be happy with me. They just kept on and on until she killed herself. That afternoon he drank himself insensible. That night he stayed beside her, kneeling on the floor, and all the time the bitterness grew worse until it swallowed up his grief. The Shays spent the night at Ormsby Street remembering Frances and the things she said before she died. The twins alone had been responsible for what had happened. They had defiled her and used her and would never let her go. Now she had escaped from them for good, but they as good as murdered her, the two of them. At the inquest, the dead woman's husband gave evidence of identification. A Dr. Julius Silverstone spoke of personality disturbances. The post-mortem showed that she had died of a massive overdose of phenobarbital taken in the night. The coroner recorded his verdict of suicide while the balance of mind was disturbed. Then the Krays took over the girl's funeral just as 2 years before. They made all arrangements for her marriage. Reggie returned to Father Hetherington to ask him to perform the ceremony. This time he agreed. The funeral turned out to be as impressive a display of public grief as the marriage had been of rejoicing. 10 solemn-looking limousines were hired for mourners. Each member of the firm had sent a wreath, as had the friends and allies of the Krays throughout the underworld. Reggie sent 3, including a 6-foot heart of scarlet roses pierced with a white arrow of carnations. He spent £200 on her plot in Chingford Cemetery, large enough for him to be buried with her when his time came. The funeral became a sort of triumph for the Krays. Reggie was treating Frances as lavishly in death as in life. The graveside scene might have been a gangster's burial, the fresh dug earth heavy with wreaths, a mass of somber villains paying their respects, police among the mourners on the off chance that Ronnie might appear. The bastards, Reggie said, had no respect for human dignity. But Ronnie was too canny to be caught like this and merely sent a large wreath of carnations. The funeral was the one occasion where Reggie was alone, weeping for all to see. As Francis was lowered into the grave, he watched the first spadeful of earth thud on the coffin, threw in a fiver for the gravediggers and walked away. In a letter afterwards, he wrote, "I relived all the good times we had had together. Milan, where we had gone to the Scala Theatre to watch Madame Butterfly, Barcelona, and the bullfights, the south of France, Rotterdam, Holland, drinking in the Blue Lagoon Club and many other places and good times. The first time we had met, and I had fallen in love looking at my wife's beautiful brown eyes and long lashes. Now all this was gone, but the memories will stay with me forever." Then he wrote a poem, which was printed in a gold and white memorial card together with a photograph of my dear wife Frances, who passed away, the 7th of June, 1967, aged 23 years. It was called, If I could climb upon a passing cloud that would drift your way, I would not ask for a more beautiful day. Perhaps I would pass a rainbow, with nature's colors so beautifully aglow. If you were there at the journey's end, I would know it was the beginning and not the end. Behind the public grief and the sentimentality, a battle had gone on between the families. The mourning had turned sour with hatred. Reggie insisted that Frances was to be buried in her wedding dress. When she was safely underground, her parents said that they had arranged with the undertaker to have a slip and pair of stockings put on her so that as little as possible of the hated dress touched her skin. They also claimed to have switched her wedding ring at the last minute for a small ring she wore as a child. Then there was trouble over the name to be used at the burial and on the tombstone. The Shays said they found a note from her asking to be buried in the name of Shay. Despite this, the funeral took place in the name of Frances Shay, otherwise Kray, and her elaborate Carrara marble headstone carries the name Frances Kray. She left no will, as next of kin Reggie inherited her estate. More bitterness was caused when he arrived at Ormsby Street and took away his letters and the jewelry he gave her. After the funeral, it was like he had a breakdown. He became like Ronnie, drunken and full of hate, and all the strength went out of him. This is how one of the firm remembers him, and according to Tommy Cowley, who was often with him now, the death of Francis triggered off complete collapse. Over the years, Reg had simply had too much to bear from Ronnie, and it had got so bad that when Reggie had this trouble over Francis on top of everything, he couldn't take it. That's why he was so badly hurt. When we're hurt, we look around for somebody to hate, and he looked everywhere. He really wanted to take vengeance on himself, but he took it against a lot of others on the way. Reggie said, "I drank more than ever, but started to visit my friend Father Hetherington pretty often. He always made me feel a lot better after a visit, as he is the most understanding man I know. At other times the gin made him dangerous. He would begin by getting maudlin over Francis, but the sentiment soon turned to bitterness. He would sit up drinking gin laced with strong black coffee to keep him awake, all the time mulling over everything he could blame upon the Shays. Hatred can sharpen up the memory, and he forgot nothing. Soon the Shays became responsible for what had happened, not just to Francis, but to him. He was convinced that they had destroyed his marriage. Everything could then be blamed on them. Nothing was his fault or Ronnie's. All his unhappiness, the breakdown of his life, had one root cause: the Shays. I should have killed them, it would have saved a lot of bother. However drunk he got, he never dared. Francis would have known and not forgiven him. A few days after the funeral, he got as far as having Frankie Shay brought to the pub where he was drinking, but he had forgotten the uncanny resemblance between the two Shay children. He began weeping and sent him away. If he had to have revenge, he would need other victims than the Shays. The first was a friend called Nobby Clark. His name came up quite casually during a drunken argument between the twins. Ronnie said something to make him think that Clark had not liked Francis. This was enough. Reggie swore that he would kill him and sat up all night nursing his hatred, By 6 a.m. the third bottle of Gordon's gin had produced a sullen fury. The hatred of the last few weeks could spend itself. Two members of the firm were sleeping in Reg's flat. He woke them. One had an old green van. They drove in it to a pub in Stoke Newington where the landlord always kept a gun or two for the twins. Reggie collected a revolver. The green van drove on to the modern flat where Clark lived with his wife and children. By now it was nearly 7 a.m. and people were passing on their way to work. Reggie rang the bell. Clark's wife was seeing to the children and answered the door. "Tell Nobby Reg is here," said the man from the green van. Afterwards, she realized she should have slammed the door in their faces, but the children were all round her. Reggie blundered past her and one of the men ripped the wires from the telephone. Reggie began shouting for her husband. He was washing and came to the head of the stairs. "You never liked my wife, you bastard. Now you talk about her behind my back. You shouldn't talk about her, not about Francis." Reggie was sobbing at him, pointing the gun up the stairs. There was a scuffle as one of the firm tried to bring Clark down. The children and the wife began to scream. Reggie was shouting. Clark was hit on the head, and as he came falling down the stairs, Reggie started shooting. All except one of the shots went wide. The one that did connect passed through Clark's leg, and he lay groaning and bleeding at the foot of the stairs. Reggie seemed satisfied. The others helped him back into the van and drove away. Hunched in the front seat, he kept muttering, "The bastard was saying things about my wife, about my lovely Francis." Tears streamed down his cheeks. "Drunken slag," said Ronnie when he heard what his twin had done. "Risking our necks like that. Here we are making ourselves a living and getting straight, and you risk everything shooting one of our friends, you drunken pig." Their brother Charlie stopped the trouble going any further. An old friend of Clark's, he was somehow able to smooth things over, calling a discreet doctor in to tend the wound, explaining about Reggie and making sure the police were kept out. "You couldn't kill a man if you tried," said Ronnie during his next argument with Reggie. "You're too fucking soft. When I did mine, I made a job of it. George couldn't walk around no more like Nobby." For Reggie, much of life was like a dream. There were quite lucid periods when he was sober and puzzled at what was happening. Sometimes he felt horror at himself. These were the times when he would visit Father Hetherington and ask him to pray for him. More often everything was so unreal that all he wanted was escape, a long East African safari where he could harden up and learn to live with himself again. North Africa, the piece of land he and Francis had bought at Bantry Bay. He did his best to keep in trim with early morning runs around Victoria Park and weekends by the sea at Steeple Bay. The dreams of her recurred, the guilt, the hatred began stirring. Francis was gone. He was alone except for Ronnie. Once he began to drink and feel the violence within him, he was at Ronnie's mercy. In July, the case against the police inspector was finally dismissed. Ronnie emerged from hiding. The shootings began in earnest. Reggie was usually drunk, always mourning Francis. One night he turned up at the Starlight Club in Highbury demanding £1,000 on the spot from a man called Fields. Fields said he had not got it. Reggie shot him through the leg and left one of the firm to smash his face in. "I would have shot the bastard through the head," said Ronnie. Reggie bumped into Buller Ward at the Regency Club. Relations with the old boxer had cooled since the night Ronnie branded Jonathan for beating up his son. Reggie punched him on the jaw. "You'll have to do better than that, Reggie boy," said Ward, riding the blow. As Reggie had no gun on him, he knifed his face open. "Better to have done him with a shooter," his twin insisted. A few nights later at the Green Dragon Club, Ronnie showed him how it should be done. A former friend called George Dixon had said something that annoyed the twins and was careless enough to be at the bar when they walked in. Ronnie went up to him as he did once to George Cornell, drew an automatic and pulled the trigger. "Nothing happened. Here," said Ronnie, taking the bullet from the chamber and handing it to Dixon. "It's just saved your life. Wear it on your watch chain as a souvenir." With Ronnie on the scene again, the firm's business became wilder, big money projects dwindled, but the twins' name was still sufficient to guarantee a lively living. That summer they began a racket peddling Purple Hearts from an address in Soho. They had an old acquaintance who was manufacturing them by the million in an Essex farmhouse. They took over the fruit machines throughout the West End that the Richardsons had run until their arrest. They also ventured into the pornography business, taking their cut from several illicit wholesalers and importers. Besides these actual rackets, Ronnie had his dreams. Africa still beckoned. He was excited by a complicated plan to take over a diamond mine in the Congo. Later there was talk of the firm's services being used to assassinate President Kaunda. Neither proposal seemed to come to anything, nor did another idea of Ronnie's, to mastermind a big chain of forged currency deals, with the plates made in New York by a virtuoso forger, notes mass-produced in Switzerland and Europe flooded with a sea of bogus currency. Ronnie was offered money to assassinate the fascist leader Colin Jordan. A member of the firm was sent to Switzerland to negotiate a link-up with one of the Messina brothers for a new vice syndicate in London. Two others went to Tangier to meet a representative of the family of the late Moise Tchom. Ronnie had been told that they would pay $500,000 for a viable plan to free the hijacked Congo leader from detention in Algiers. His plan included the use of helicopters, nerve gas, and a strike force from the firm fighting their way into the Tchom villa. Tchom would make his getaway by hovercraft. For 2 days discussions went on at the Riff Hotel between the men from the Tchoms and the men from the Krays, but Ronnie's ideas appeared extreme, and after a great deal of talking and drinking one more potential customer finally went elsewhere. It was an uneasy summer. A tall man with a Belfast accent had been reported in the East End talking to people about George Cornell. When Ronnie checked on him, he found that his name was Mooney. He was a detective inspector from the Yard's flying squad. More rumors came in then about a police spy on the firm. Ronnie had never trusted anyone except Reggie and his mother. Now his suspiciousness began to spread through the firm. Nobody knew who might betray him. One member of the firm had a fight with Scotch Jack Dixon and blinded him in one eye with a bottle. When Dixon came out of hospital, Ronnie told him he should get revenge. The comradeship within the firm was not improved when two of its members disappeared after trouble with Ronnie. One was his driver, a talkative young man called Frost. There was a rumor that he had tried blackmailing Ronnie over a boy. Soon after, he was followed by Mad Teddy Smith. There had been a long weekend at Steeple Bay with Ronnie and some boys. There was an argument, a fight, and Teddy was never seen again. The twins never spoke about him. Nobody asked questions. To this day, Frost and Teddy Smith remain on Scotland Yard's missing persons list. From then on, the firm became an isolated world of violence and mistrust, with each man for himself. The one man who left the firm received various threats and a dead rat in the post. On his birthday, there was a funeral wreath outside his door. But despite the danger and the atmosphere, there remained definite attractions in the firm. Money was one. The twins could still ensure that everyone in favor collected a minimum of £40 a week in personal protection money. Prestige was another. The twins were still the most feared gangsters in the country. Anyone working for them could do as much as he liked in gangland, drink what he felt like free, catch money on the side, never go hungry for a woman. For some of the firm, this was enough. They were quite ready to desert when the time came, but not before.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly, moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.